first off, I want to thank everyone for attending, and also, it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here in front of everybody, and my first time in New Mexico, and it's lovely to see everybody so engaged in food, and in the topics around food. I had the great pleasure in the mid-90s of meeting Dr. Ross Welch. He was an ARS scientist, the head of the Soil, Nutrition, and Crop Laboratory at Cornell. He's my friend and a mentor, and really taught me about how important it was to have nutrients in food. And what really surprised me, because I was a new scientist, and he goes, well, you know, but we don't really pay attention to how many nutrients are actually in food. And I went, really? Like, that just seemed like something that we would have done. And then I was sitting on an airplane, and I was sitting next to Dr. Eileen Jackson from the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta. And she is a medical anthropologist. And she said, why don't you people in agriculture pay any attention to what's in food? And I went, don't we? And she says, no, you don't. And do you know how important food is to disease and epidemics and things like that? And I went, no, I really didn't. And so the reason I'm standing here today is because of the conversations I've had with people like Ross Welch and with Eileen and with all the farmers who I have the great privilege of working with, who've been very patient with me as I've moved along. So with that, we're going to go ahead. There are bugs and worms in your real soil, not dirt, your soil. And so we're going to talk a lot about them, and they really don't like being disturbed. And you've got to think about that, because like, if I were to go and bulldoze your house with a tillage machine, how would you feel? You'd run away, you know. I'd probably get some of your offspring and maybe some of the elderly and recycle their nutrients, so tillage really works. But we're not going to talk about tillage, because I am going to talk about not tilling, about preserving soil as a habitat, because that's exactly what it is. It's a habitat. Now, I heard, you know, the last two speakers, we've talked a lot about how do we nourish everybody. Most plants grow in soil, so soil is really the foundation. And healthy soils give you healthy plants, give you healthy people and healthy livestock. So it's all about soil. So we're going to get right to the underground and to the root of nutrition. We're going to talk about these guys. I have lots of these beautiful scanning electron micrographs that were done by Byron Lee at Ag Canada, and Byron just has the touch. I mean, they take a really long time, but he gets the Vogue pose, that's for sure. These are orobatid mites, and they really drive nutrient cycling. And that's why I'm going to talk about animals. Everybody talks about, well, I'm feeding my microbes. Look, your microbes are your primary producers. What really cycle things in the soil are the animals. The animals are what cycle, because they eat up the primary producers and poop out the good stuff and then keep everything going. Earthworms. Have a look at these guys. That orange band tells you that they're sexy. The fact that they have all these cocoons in there mean that they've actually been actively reproducing. Earthworms, when they get the good stuff, when they're fed a balanced diet, man, they'll start reproducing like crazy, and we can build earthworm populations, and we can start getting some of the benefits from them. If you build it, okay, you can use no-till. In this case, this is David Brandt from Ohio, and he's seeding directly into his cover crop. And the other thing I'm going to say today is we decided last night, a group of us, and Gabe Brown, who's going to speak after me, and I have known each other for a while, we decided last night that we have never really liked the term cover crop, so we're going to talk about soil health primers. Okay, so he's seeding right into his soil health primer. You don't have to use high tech. You can use low tech and still seed into your soil health primer. I use this picture a little bit to show you oxen. The one thing that well, in this case, Brahmins, the one thing I would say that integrated livestock into African agriculture is really critical. And since I'm standing on a pedestal, I'm going to use it. The livestock are a measure of a man's stature and wealth in African culture, in most African cultures. And in sustainable agriculture, we oftentimes, in conservation agriculture, we have taken out the livestock equation, and that has had an immeasurable impact on men in African culture. And we need to put it back in, and we need to actually put culture back into agriculture and start talking about how we work with the cultures and the tribal aspects and actually integrate livestock. Now the great thing about it is that when we put our soil health primers back in and our forages back in, we can put livestock back in and make them incredibly valuable to the overall system, and still use livestock for animal pull. I get a lot of flack when I go to Africa because I actually believe in animal traction because of the cultural issues. And so there's an amazing, I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania just after Sandy, and there's a man there that has built a hydraulic animal pulled disc seeder that is just an amazing piece of equipment that I think we need in Africa, and we're going to go there. So if you build it, they will come. Have a look at those streaks in there. That's earthworm channels that are filled with mineral soil. We hear people in biodynamics talk about remineralizing. Well, just add a few, get your earthworm population up and you'll remineralize all you like. You want all these guys in there. And we can have this. If we don't disturb their habitat, they'll work for us. They'll recycle. So if we're going to feed everybody, we have to have a healthy foundation, because you can't build much of a house on a poor foundation. And when you have a poor foundation, your house isn't going to last very long either. So it's all about healthy soils, and healthy soils have a lot of things living in them. They look like this when you get up close. Now look at the chompers on there. Okay, that thing is going to go through anything. It's a tank. It's a chomping tank. It's eating up, they're eating up each other, they're eating up, organic matter, they're chewing on the bacteria and the fungi. And the beautiful thing about it is that they're pooping out these beautiful pellets that restore the structure to the soil, which allows for further microbial activity. So it's all about the chain of events that happen. And if you are doing tillage because you're growing potatoes in this case, then grow a mulch. Grow a mulch. Because what we noticed in this experiment in Switzerland is that where we didn't have mulch, we had all sorts of soil erosion. We lost all our productivity. We were putting it all back with chemicals. And we had to use a lot of fungicide, whereas when we mulched, we didn't have any of those issues. So there are lots of ways to take the same ground and improve it. But the first thing you have to do is go into rehab. Okay, you have to go into rehab, you have to have a brain transplant, or as Gabe Brown has said, you have to get rid of the compaction up here. And then once you do that, we can go forward. You feed your below ground partners a balanced diet, and that's critical. And that balanced diet comes from growing diversity. It comes from organic matter from your diverse crop rotations, but it's all about feeding them a balanced diet. And it's not about how much organic matter, it's about the quality of the organic matter. It's the same with everything. It's not about how much food you eat, it's about what the quality of the food is. Do you meet your nutritional requirements with 100 grams, or do you meet it with 500 grams? If you meet it with 100 grams, we don't have the same problems. And that's what we want for these guys. And you'll have to just accept the fact that I still think about things in metric. I try and convert everything. So just wave your hand if you don't know what my numbers mean. The first thing is that soil organic matter is the primary food source for everything, and that you really want, Michael Smith, who did the work on the 20:31 ratio for mineralization, we've changed that now with a lot of the work that we're doing in South Africa on the dairy pastures. And some of the work that we've done with Gabe on, really understanding more about Gabe's system and in the mob grazing system, is that it really needs to be about 50 to 1 for us to maintain cover. Because I'm really going to push the conservation agricultural principles, which are minimize disturbance or just get rid of disturbance of your soil, keep it covered, and add diversity. Okay, it's that simple. We do that, we'll have sustainable soils, and sustainable soils, healthy soils are going to grow healthy plants. In the United States and in North America, typically we don't talk about humus very much. In Europe, they actually separate all these things out. There are many different forms. Some of it is liquid, like root exudates. Some of it is dead plant material and all those dead bugs and things like that that are in. And the other stuff is just stuff that's been really, really chewed on and pooped out and then re-chewed, and that's your humus. This is stuff that's been fed on. You can see that we have in there, we have there's insect eggs, and actually if you look in there, you'll see mycorrhizal hyphae, and you'll see spores, and all sorts of things, because everything is kind of living right underneath that organic matter, because when it rains and it leaches out, then they get nutrients, and they're living right around the root zones too, because roots leak things, and so that's where everything is happening. We have the decomposition all happening up at the surface and just a little area below it, about an inch below it. And then we have everything happening in and along that root zone, because that's actively leaking and actively working. Food webs, and that's what I'm talking about. Here's your sources of carbon, and carbon really drive everything. Now, it does drive everything? Absolutely. We need the carbon because most of the organisms in the soil cannot produce carbon. They rely on plants to produce carbon. Photosynthesis. Okay, but the soil microbes are incredibly competitive against plant roots. And if we don't keep the nitrogen and the micronutrients and things like that up, then they bind it. And they take it away from the plant. And oftentimes we'll see plants starving, or we'll see immobilization. And yet we have all this soil biology. I've seen soils that have almost 1 milligram of active microbial biomass in the soil for every gram of soil. And starving plants because we don't have predators, because we have bad soil structure. It's all connected. We need these guys. These guys cannot burrow. So they need good soil structure. If they don't have good soil structure, they can't move and they can't feast. And they recycle 45% of your nitrogen and your nutrients from organic matter, which is the microbial biomass, which is their primary food source. So we need them to be zooming around consuming things. Predator-prey relationships are what drive nutrient cycling. Okay, you've all had some food, you've had some coffee. Okay, we're going to memorize this and move on. Okay, what you need to know is that it's a web, and it's like a spider web. You poke your finger in critical places, you take out certain things, and the whole thing collapses. And we don't want that. We want it to stay functioning. Soil structure, chemistry, all are really important in all of this. So here's the model that I work from. Soil health is the middle box. And it is a function of chemistry, chemical properties of soil, the physical properties of the soil, and the biology drives it and unites all those properties together. Soil productivity, oftentimes we're measuring it in terms of yield, gain on our cattle, things like that. No. Let's measure it in terms of food quality. Are we putting the nutrients into the product, or are we letting them leach into the environment? The last thing we want to do is have them leach into the environment. We want to put everything that we've got into the food. Then we have health and environmental quality, and that's what our ultimate goal needs to be. And that's why we're producing healthy soils. Dare I talk about Gaia? Yes. I'm going to be fearless. I think Gaia Theory is really, it really embodies what we're talking about today. It's about connectedness and how we are connected. Everything is connected. And I'm going to show you how we start from the ground up and everything is connected. In my world, I talk about connectedness, and I think that's really important. Just as I talked about culture and livestock, it's connected to soil health because we have overgrazing in most parts of Africa. What's the biggest problem? Desertification. It's not about growing crops, it's about the fact that we overgraze everything. And we have soil erosion and desertification from overgrazing, and that's a cultural issue in the end. So let's deal with it in that way. It's all connected. This is David Brandt, getting to the root of soil health. David Brandt, for those of you who don't know him, is a no-till farmer in Ohio. He's halfway between Columbus and Lancaster, Ohio, in a place called Carroll. David Brandt, over 20 years, has changed his soil type from being clay to actually a loam. Ohio State said that wasn't possible, and he said, well, you better come out and look. And they did, and now they've written papers about how David Brandt has changed his soil type. And that's really important because the largest clay pot factory in the United States is right next to David Brandt's farm. So, and he's done it using daikon radishes and peas, and now we're working with some other cover crops. David has also shown that smaller is better. I mean, John Deere don't like him very much because he's actually advocating smaller equipment because once he gets his soils right, everything goes in really easy. He doesn't need the horsepower. He's using less fuel. It's all better. It's all about roots. Diversity of roots. We think about above ground canopies. Well, I want to challenge you all to think about below ground canopies. Let's fill up the profile with roots, different kinds of roots. Because that's what builds our organic matter. The above ground stuff doesn't build our organic matter. It's the below ground stuff that makes things really happen. We can speed things right along if we're using roots. So let's think more about using roots. When I was in Germany at the National Field Day in June, well, I was there for that, but the company, DSVC, we had this big field day, and their head of cover crop production, his soil health primer, we had 300 people at a field day, and they dug the mother of all trenches across a profile of crops so that we could see the roots. There were 300 people in the trench. And it went across the back of 5 acres. And it was amazing. But you know what? We could see, you know, continuous corn, what that looked like. What happens when we add, you know, these primers into the soil? What happens when we add these other different crops? What does it look like? How deep do the roots go? What about the varieties? Well, there were varieties in there that had deep roots and the same plant that had shallow roots. Ah, okay, now we're getting there. Soil temperature. When we build healthy soils, we start to see the temperature go up. We start to see melting earlier in the season on our grasslands. Neil Dennis, Saskatchewan, 8 feet deep freezing. He doesn't get that because his soils are so healthy with his grazing system that he's actually growing. He actually starts growing before everybody else around him. Soil temperature. Now, soil temperature, planting to soil temperature. Gail Fuller is here. I worked with Gail, and we're planting, you know, we planted corn to soil temperature. Now, there's a reason for that because look at this. No, maybe not. Look at that. Look at that. Now, why is that? What's happening there? Well, what's happening there is that physiological temperature. Most things work at an optimum around 20 degrees Celsius, which is about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. They like it. It's the optimum temperature. Roots grow fast, lots of root exudates. Man, everything is happening. When you increase the amount of carbon exuded, you get more enzymes, you get more recycling, you get more things happening. Soil health, it's all connected. Here we go. Look what happens. We can actually use plants and use mixtures of plants, use our forages to actually start building soil structure. And when we get better soil structure, we get better predator-prey relationships, and everything starts working a whole lot better. And we start to see soil like that. That's what it should look like. Not like that. And we need to break it. We need to change it from there to there. And we can do that by getting the plants down, starting to use things, and getting mixed forages. We can't do it with monoculture, but we can do it when we start to mix things together. And that's the wild thing. When we start to mix plants together, sometimes we get it right, and 2 + 2 starts to equal 10 and 12. And then sometimes we get it wrong, and it equals 0 or negative. But you know, that's the fun of it all. Optimum temperature. We have high-speed transport in our internet. Mycorrhizas are the underground network. They keep all the plants connected. Mycorrhizal fungi don't live without a host. They can't live in the soil without a host. So when we talk about mycorrhizas, we're really talking about them connecting all the plants that are in there that are mycorrhizal, and they're creating a network, and they're shifting between the plants. So everybody in the network gets connected, and if they need something, things will preferentially move from a source to a sink, and they start moving source-sink relationships. This is the sacred circle of the underground. This is a rhizosphere. The rhizosphere is the interaction between plants, organisms, and soil. And I adapted this. I was having a great chat with Roylene Rides in the Door, who's in Oklahoma, and we were talking about how the sacred circle worked for her. And I said, you know what, that's what's really happening below ground, is we're connecting all these things. And she said, yeah, well, my people really understand connections. And I said, yeah, well, then let's talk about connections. Look at the rhizosphere in that faba bean. Faba beans are fabulous. They're the only bean that actually loves to grow in cool, wet soils and then loves the heat later on. So we're learning a whole lot more about growing faba beans. Rhizosphere effect. We were looking at the plant breeding, and I was like, oh, we got problems with disease, and disease moves with the weather. Yes, it does. But plants that are grown in mixtures don't have the same disease issues because it's harder for the diseases to find them. There we are. Look at the difference in the growth pattern there. We get healthy soils, and even plants that have the same amount of root discoloration on them actually grow better because the soil biology is still supplying that really, that compromised root with the nutrients that it actually needs. In a way, because plants take up nutrients more effectively and efficiently when they're mediated through a biological system, so they can get what they need. Every different seed you put in the ground, every one, has its own unique signature. It leaks a signature. When seeds absorb water, they leak a signature of compounds into the ground. And they say, hi, I need a rhizobium. Or they say, hey, I need some of that Bacillus thuringiensis around my roots to stop things from grazing on me. Remember that a plant is stuck, right? It's stuck. Can't move. It can't run away from something. It's there. So, I mean, Mother Nature gave it everything that it needs to defend itself. No seed germinates and goes, oh, I think I'll die today. I mean, they're trying to grow. They're trying to produce seeds. That's what plants are trying to do. And so they are defending themselves because they have to, because they can't move. So they're going to defend themselves, but they don't, and they will armor up when they need to, when things are grazing on the roots and whatnot. But what they're also doing is pulling things, that microbial environment around their roots so they can protect themselves. So they are actively doing preventative maintenance. They're preventative. They're putting Bacillus thuringiensis in their roots so that they can, so one bite of that and that insect's dead. That's what, and they're putting in bacteria, growth promoting rhizobacteria living around the roots with the mycorrhiza so that they can grow faster. When a plant's colonized by mycorrhiza, all of a sudden the microbial environment around that plant is so much more protective and so much more about growth. Well, that's because the mycorrhiza is really selfish and it needs the host to be really healthy, so it makes the host really healthy. And for those of you that are Trekkies, it's like having a trill. This is what's going on in there. Things are moving out, things are moving in. It's active transport. Things are moving. Not every plant leaks the same amount of compounds. And what that means is that if we Look here, white clover, a lot of nitrate. No surprise, corn, a lot of nitrate. Corn likes nitrate, it uses nitrate. Oats are the same way. If you have a problem with wild oats, you know that you have a lot of available nitrate in the soil because they love it. Same with white clover. What I want in my mixes are things like sunflowers, but more like beans and peas that really have 4 of the different compounds that are going to drive that change and going to give me a diversity of compounds. It's all about diversity. Diversity of compounds, diversity of species, diversity, just diversity. And plants will do all of this. They will leak stuff that actually, you know what I'm saying? You're stuck. You got to mobilize phosphorus. Well, you're going to leak things out of your roots. Lupins, for example, are really cool. They have these cluster roots, and they pulse acids out when they're phosphorus deficient. So they'll actually pulse the acids out, release things off the calcium, and then take it up. Cool. Rooibos tea does the same thing. Iron. Okay, I don't have enough. I'm going to chelate some of these micronutrients. So they chelate them. Pseudomonas loves that because they need chelated iron too. So they're going to hang around plants that do a lot of that so that they get the iron that they need. That's a growth-promoting rhizobacteria that also helps prevent diseases in the plants. This is everything that's going on in the roots. Man, can we use plants to take advantage of that? We are not using plants enough. And we're not using roots enough. And when I say the rhizosphere, it's really about the rhizosphere because we need the above ground, we need the below ground, and we need everything else that works with that. This is a picture of mycorrhiza, and you can actually see the structures that are actually in there. This is the arbuscules. These are the hyphal connections, and actually you can sort of see a little bit of the background of the cells. This is knapweed. Knapweed is highly mycorrhizal. Redroot pigweed, very mycorrhizal. The weeds know how to take advantage of this stuff. Most of our land races had mycorrhiza. We know that from the work of Barb Hetrick at K-State. And she was at K-State. We saw this. And then we started breeding out the mycorrhiza because we were using a lot of nutrients in our, luxurious amounts of nutrients and whatnot. And so I really believe in that we do need, genetics are a part of the story, but we need to make sure that we're using the symbionts that the plants need and making them, and actually taking advantage of them optimally. And not all of our varieties do that, and we need to actually screen them a lot better. Mycorrhizae, again, sensitive to over-fertilization, with phosphorus in particular. But look at what they do. Phosphorus, calcium, zinc, iron, boron, copper. Iron, anemia, zinc, brain function, all those things. We can build nutrient-dense foods by taking advantage of healthy soil and the interactions that go in there. This is a dwarf maize. Here's our regular corn. You notice the color? It's greener. When you see green color, and I ask you all, sometime take a polarized lenses for your sunglasses and have a look at your fields, and you'll see the differential green colors. That nice green, intense green with a little bit of a blue tinge means that you've got high B vitamins, vitamin C, lots of free amino acids, and for those of you that are livestock producers, you know that means you need less energy to convert to protein. We can do it, folks. It's all about down there. Healthy soils. Let's take advantage of the mycorrhizas. Potatoes. How many people knew potatoes were mycorrhizal, and that when we get the mycorrhiza on the potatoes, then we get more pseudomonads in the rhizosphere, and that means that the tubers don't get scab. Cool. So let's improve. So how do we do this, okay? I've talked about, oh yeah, there's all these things that go on. Let's talk a little bit before we finish. We look to nature. Gosh, I wish my boy's going to be 21 here soon. And that was when he was 3. But, it's about looking to nature. We forgot about that. Mother Nature gives us all the clues. Count the number of plants in a square foot. There's broadleafs and cereals. Yes, we need that. Model grassland systems, CO2, climate change. It wasn't just about the diversity, it was about the legumes. So we need to make sure that in our soil primers we're putting legumes. If you look in a native grassland, you will see legumes in there. You'll see the vetches. You will see a lot of, even lotus and some of our native legumes will always be in there. And some of them come up early, like some of the lupins. Some of the things that are actually kind of poisonous, but I mean, we can actually see that they value in the lupins, and that's how we reestablish grasslands. This is the Monet cover crop, our Monet soil primer. But potatoes, we use this mix. We actually grow potatoes, and then in between, not just around the perimeter, we grow it between to keep the beneficial insects so that they can always be around the potatoes. Annual forages, yes, soil health primers. And look at the earthworms like them too. They want that diversity, and that diversity in feed begets diversity in species. And yes, there are still one or two of them around, and all of a sudden they start to come up again. It's a spiral. Once we start the ball rolling, once we get the avalanche started, we're off. Integrated livestock. A lot of farmers who are cropping farmers say, well, I can't afford to grow something that just is for soil health. So, well, it's not just for soil health, there's integrated pest management, but if you have livestock, it's like, oh, great, I can add diversity to my bottom line. Ooh, diversity in business too, all connected. Feeding ostriches is really, actually growing forage crops for ostriches is actually kind of tricky. If you thought that sheep graze hard or horses, ostriches are worse. They're also, you got to take everything shiny off because all of a sudden they'll come up behind you and like poke a button. Or if you're wearing earrings, they'll just take your earring right off. And livestock, really, truly important in that integrated system. Planting corn into cereal rye, why not? Improves the mycorrhiza. Keeping something short between the rows, living mulches. This is a new experiment this year where I grew chickpeas. Actually, those are small kabulis, billy beans, and I grew them in between the rows of wheat. I didn't use any fertilizer. I out-yielded. This year our yields were really bad, but the conventional farmer, who's even a recovering conventional no-till farmer, did 34 bushel wheat at 14% protein. And with my billy beans and my wheat and no fertilizer, I did 40 bushels and 14% protein. Mixtures, always mixtures. This is Daryl Twitty, who is the head of a dairy group in South Africa. This is the mix that we put in instead of kikuyu grass. We're growing 50 kilograms. Right now we're growing 50 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. That's like 50 pounds of dry matter per acre per day. At greater than 30% protein, we need to change our mix. We need more cereals in there because now we're having aphid issues. And our soils are 3 degrees higher in Celsius than the soils surrounding us because of all the activity that's going on in there. And the activity is just going to get better and better and better. Now, we are using irrigation on this dairy farm. We've also diversified the bottom line to grass-fed beef because now on the same amount of ground, he is producing more milk with a higher calcium level, and he's mowing pastures right now because he can't get to them in time. So now we've added grass-fed beef to that so that we can actually have a diversity again in our bottom line. So you can see that it all works together. It's about really getting rid of the compaction, and away we go. Here's Ross and Julie Stockhill. This is their farm. These are the mixtures that they were using. and really, you know, and we're not having problems with mastitis and that. His year anniversary of changing this system comes up in December, and as he said to me the other day, he said, you know what, Jill, I pulled out the IV and I've gone cold turkey. And he said, I still get the shakes, but I'm, you know, and I said, just call me Nitrogen Anonymous. Plant species interactions, carbon, yeah, climate change. Wow, we can do that. We can connect our plant communities and go for it. Role of genetics, same soil, look at that. Roots. Yeah, let's look at the roots. We need to realize that we got to change this. Now here's the kicker. We don't have food scarcity. We have political issues and distribution issues, but let's start working on really good stuff. Let's make it good for you. Let's have a look at the roots. Let's use the insects, spiders. Look at all the webs. Do you think we have an aphid problem there? Not likely. So when you are standing on your ground, remember, you are standing on the rooftop of another world, and we have a privilege of being able to manage it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.